This screencast is about integrating quotations. What that means is that you're putting quotations into your own writing and you're putting them in nice and smoothly. You're not dropping them in or plopping them in. You're making them flow nicely with your own words. Why use quotes? You need to use quotes to support your ideas, to show that other people agree with you, to clarify where you got an idea, or provide examples. Quotes always act as supporting details or examples. You can also think of quotations as evidence. Here's how to use quotations correctly. There are two types that we'll look at right now. Those are short quotes and long quotes. Short quotes can easily be dropped into sentences. Of course, they have to be part of the larger sentence structure. So one way to know that that's going on is that if you are reading something out loud, the people who are listening wouldn't know where your words ended and the quote began. You just put the quotation marks around the inserted words, and you can take whatever you need from the original text and then you just cite it. So it doesn't have to be a complete sentence that you take from the text. So here you can see that just the last part of the sentence has been taken. Now, of course, there needs to be some sort of citation at the end. So really, it would be like quotation, parentheses. We know this is according to Jeremy Bentham, so we could just put the page number, and I'll just make one up. So that would actually be correct. Okay, so you can put in full sentences with short quotes, but you can also just put in parts of a sentence, a clause or a phrase. For long quotes, this is what you want to do. It's called, also known as block quotes. That if the quote is, generally this says more than a line or two, generally the rule is about 3. So 3 lines or more. Once you type it in, you're going to want to format it in this way that's called a block quote. And so here what you'll have is you'll put your context of your quote here, so what's going on before you have the quote, and you will introduce it with a colon right here, and then you indent. Okay, so you'll see how there's a space, and then you indent. Of course, you would be double spacing, but it's the same idea. And then you just resume your writing right here. You don't indent again. So the indentation conveys the fact that what you have chosen is a longer quote. Okay, so how would you introduce direct quotations? So instead of saying say or state all the time, you can use these words when you're talking about how a writer is doing something. So you could say the writer asserts or speculates, or their emotions indicate, or something like that. You can use these words with inferences as well. We're going to look at one other thing. Here are your quotation marks. We're going to look at avoiding dropped quotes. Why do we not want to drop quotes? The problem is if we drop quotes in, then they're not really integrated into the sentence. And so it messes up the flow of your writing, and it's also not clear why you put the quote in, or where it came from, or what you want the reader to know about it. So again, the direct quote, it can interrupt your writing. You're probably not giving your reader the context they need, so you just started right in. It's not clear who is saying it. And it's also making the reader do the work when really you as the writer should be the one to do the work. Okay, it also could suggest that you don't totally understand it, and thus you're sort of avoiding introducing it. So you need to always have some sort of lead-in before the quote so that people know whose words are being quoted, or they understand why the quotation is important. So you want to give them, you want to sort of prime them or get them ready to be aware of how important the quote is. So here you'll see that this quote explains, it sets the larger context about journalists critical of genetic engineering, and then it gives a specific person, and it says in an article for a magazine and then introduces it with a colon. And I really encourage you to use the colon, especially when you have a complete sentence that is an example of what you just said. And that can be a great way to introduce the quotation. Again, you still have the page number and the period on the outside. Okay, so things you want to be aware of to avoid drop quotes or to correct them if you have them is to make sure that you've identified the speaker and the context, so you know who is talking and what's going on, and that you start out with your own idea. So you're not just summarizing, but you're putting in some analysis here. So in this example, this person claims that this woman's house is a reflection of her being out of sync with the times. So that's an analysis, that's our judgment there. It's not just a summary. So again, that's your idea. Of course, you're not saying I or we or you, but that's still your idea. So here are a couple easy ways to bring in the quotes. These first two are formulas here. So in such and such a book, the author argues, quote, page number, or according to the author in such and such a book, quote. You can also vary it up a little bit. So in the words of so-and-so, or so-and-so, related to so-and-so, points out. You can also start with the quote and then say who wrote it, or you can introduce it with more of a long introduction and then jump right into the quote. So you'll see that the quotes can go at the beginning of the middle, or not the quotes, I'm sorry. Where you lead in or where you analyze or describe the quote can go at the beginning, the middle, or the end of the quote. So sometimes you'll see that quotes are interrupted, and that would be in the middle. Sometimes the quote will be at the beginning, like this example right here. There will be the quote, and then the sort of speaker tag is what we've called it, that comes after. And then the most often type you'll see is when the introduction comes at the beginning. So you have the beginning, and then introduction, lead-in, speaker tag, whatever you want to call it, and then the quote. And that concludes integrating quotations correctly. Enjoy.